Have you ever been in that season of your life to where you were fighting with someone? And what I mean by that is that this argument, this fighting began to take over your life, began to consume you. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation. I don't know who it was with. It could be with a spouse. It could be with a friend. It could be with a neighbor. It could be with a coworker. But you begin to fight with this person. You begin to argue with them. You begin to sometimes hate them, don't we? And that fighting that's within us, it begins to kind of taint everything in our life. It begins to poison everything in our lives. It begins to consume us. We start thinking all the time about this person. They begin to kind of take over our lives. Have you ever been in a situation like that? And it consumes who we are. And then, not only does that relationship go sour, but then it affects other relationships because we see our other relationships through the lens of this failed relationship, this wounded, this relationship that's not working. And then you get to the point and you're like, man, I just want some peace. I just want some quiet. I just want things to be okay for a minute. And to not be fighting with someone. And then Jesus says in our Beatitude that we're studying 7 out of 8, we've gotten to 7 out of the 8, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Peacemakers. Not just live in peace, but to pursue peace, to be peacemakers. How do we do that? Many times we're war weary, war fatigue. Haven't you heard that in the last few years? Because we've been 15 years in war fatigue, and sometimes in our own lives we feel that fatigue, don't we? We're fatigued by fighting with people. How can we become peacemakers? You know, we think of America as being a peaceful country, and there's been times that we've been at peace. But oddly enough, out of the 239 years that we have been a democracy, only 222 of those years have been technically at peace. 222 years out of 239 years at peace. 21 years of actual peacetime in America. Only 7% of our time as a democracy has not been engaged in some kind of war with somebody. Whether it's the Spanish, the Indians, with each other in the Civil War, the English, whoever it is, we have been in conflict with somebody. In fact, the U.S. has never gone a decade without war. And technically, there's never been a peacetime president. And there's only been the longest time that we have been at peace in this country was 5 years. 1935 to 1940, during the Great Depression, when we had a diplomacy, we had a foreign policy of isolationism. 201 out of the 248 world conflicts since World War II have involved us. And then there's the money. How much do we spend as a country on killing people? Now, I don't say any of this to try to change anybody's political persuasion or even to talk about politics. I'm just stating some facts about what we do as a country. 41% of the world's spending on military happens here. 41%, nearly half of everything that's spent on military, with all these countries that exist in the world, we spend 41% of that. About $1 trillion a year that's on the books. It's a lot of money. In fact, China, the next country next to us, is 8%. Russia, 4%. And in fact, if you were to take the next 13 countries and put them all together, we still spend more than they do. $1 trillion. And in fact, if we were going to start giving away that money to everybody in America, here's your check. $3,000 this year. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Now, there's all kinds of different dialogues that we could get into, that we are peacekeepers in this world, that we as the most blessed nation have the responsibility to do that. But at the same time, we spend an exorbitant amount of energy and money fighting, don't we? And we do that also in our lives. Gandhi said, hey, if you were to take an eye for an eye, then the whole world's going to be blind if you live up to that. And not only that, if you do eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, then we're all going to be toothless too, right? Which isn't so pretty. What do you think about when you think about peace? Probably some of us think about the Nobel Peace Prize. And it says in the Nobel Peace Prize, when they give this out, that it's to the person who shall have done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. And it was created by a guy by the name of Alfred Nobel. But what's interesting is how it kind of came about. Alfred Nobel was this rich guy. He was a rich businessman, a rich inventor. And then one day he looked in the paper and he got to read his own obituary. Can you imagine how that would be? You wake up one day and then you look in the newspaper and then lo and behold, Laws is dead. And he got to glimpse into what his legacy was, what people would say about him when he was dead and gone. Wouldn't you be interested in knowing what they're going to write about you when you've died and passed on? But he got that chance. Alfred Nobel got to read his obituary before he died, and he didn't like it. Because his brother had died, and they accidentally wrote him up instead. And they said, Alfred Nobel has died. The merchant of death is dead. That's right. Alfred Nobel was one of the first kind of arms dealer. In fact, he invented dynamite. And in that obituary, it went on to say, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before. You see, dynamite used to not be called dynamite. It used to be called Nobel's blasting powder. You want that Peace Prize? So, when he saw that legacy, he decided he needed to do something to promote peace, to change that. And so he dedicated his vast wealth to several awards, which among them is the pursuit of peace. How do we pursue peace in our lives? The first thing that we've got to do is to love peace. There's some people, I believe, that probably don't love peace. They love chaos. They love drama. They love the conflict. Conflict is normative. It's going to happen no matter where we are in our life. It's going to happen with your spouse. It's going to happen with your friend. You're going to come into conflict eventually. But it's what you do with that conflict. Do you turn it into World War III? The psalmist of Otis says how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell in unity. Isn't it wonderful when we are at peace in our lives? We should pursue peace among nations. We should try to promote that. We should try to promote us being a peaceful country. You know, for all the things that advanced in the 20th century, it was the bloodiest century with war. 160 million people, soldiers, died in war the last century. We need to promote unity among races. Of one blood, God has made all nations, it says in Acts chapter 17. To try to mend those relationships and to try to promote reconciliation. You know, still, Sunday morning, 10 o'clock is the most segregated hour in our country. One time they asked Arthur Ashe, the great tennis phenomenon, about when he was dealt that blow of he got AIDS from a transfusion when he had a heart attack. And they asked him about it. And his response was this: as painful as it is to know that I have the dread of this disease, nothing could be as painful as the rejection I have endured over a life by virtue of my color. That the sentence of certain death didn't affect him or hurt him as much as the pain and rejection he felt for his race. Peace among races. Peace among religions. Now, while we stand by God's Word and while we uphold it and we preach Christ, we also preach the peace of Christ. And that means we don't convert people by the sword or by the gun. Out of all the wars, there's been many fought over religious intolerance. The writer James says what pure religion is. It's undefiled before God and the Father, and this, to visit the fatherless and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. We have to remember, if we're not being good to people, then we're really not practicing a good religion, are we? Peace among neighbors. James said that the royal law is to love our neighbors as ourselves. Sometimes our neighbors are some of the hardest to love, aren't they? Turn your music down. But probably where sometimes it's the hardest to love people is when it's our own family. Probably some of the worst fights and arguments and whatever you want to call it, it's probably been within your family, hasn't it? It's because we can, and it's because we know. We know that we can get away with it. We know their family. Hey, I can say whatever I want to this person, and I know what hurts them. And we drive that knife into them a little deeper, and we hurt them, we wound them, we win, don't we? But are we peacemakers? Blessed are the peacemakers. Oh, and then let's not forget the church. Our churches should be the most peaceful places on earth. Amen. But yet we have found the church to be a breeding ground of not only complacency, but also fighting and bickering and splitting. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Well, how do we establish peace? Let me give you a few principles. Authority. Authority is a good thing. Civil authority is a good thing. There is no power other than that which is given by God, Romans 13. Jesus said to Pilate, you wouldn't have this authority unless it was given to you. Authority helps secure peace. Authority within the civil institution, within the home, within a church. Authority is important to secure that peace. Also, love expressed in humility. That churches, yes, have some answers, but we don't always have the answer. And we're not always right. Showing humility, lending an ear, listening, is sometimes our best bet to peace. Toleration. I know that that's a word that comes with a lot of baggage because everybody preaches it and no one does it. But extending common grace to people we don't necessarily agree with. God extends it to us, doesn't He? Do you live perfectly? I don't, but God still gives me the grace to live and to function and still blesses me in spite of my life that's not always aligned with His will. Also, healthy boundaries within your relationship. Finding those parameters to guard yourself against being wounded or hurt. But a lot of times what happens in our relationships is this. We don't ever communicate. And then the smallest thing happens and then all hell breaks loose. Yes. Now I'll give you an example of this. There was a war in 1925 between Greece and Bulgaria. And guess what finally broke the camel's back, the straw? It was a soldier running across the boundary and getting a stray dog. And they shot him, and war broke out. And it's commonly called the War of the Stray Dog. But how many of us have these stray dogs running in our lives? That we don't communicate all the things that are going on. We never talk about it. And then this little stray dog runs off. And then all of a sudden, we start shooting, don't we? How many people have we shot over our stray dog? Secondly, we need to live in peace. James says that where do wars and fights come? They come from inside of us. They come because of our desires to have something. Our desire for ambition, our desire for greed, hunger for power, the esteem of men. We want all these things. And because of it, we make other people suffer. Where does it come from? And ultimately, we need to pray for peace. Pray for peace in our country. Pray for peace among our churches. Pray for peace in our families. And ultimately, what is the chief thing that we're after in this world? It is for the souls of men. Paul said that God desires that every man be saved in 1 Timothy 2. So every effort that we make should be to enable that cause and not to win some war. What are we truly battling for in our lives? For truth, for goodness, for brotherhood, for unity, or is it for ourselves? Paul said, we wrestle not with flesh and blood. We're not fighting a carnal war. We're not loading up on weapons to fight each other. We're fighting a spiritual battle, a battle of truth versus untruth, good versus evil. And the only way we can win that war is not by doing evil. It's by doing good. It's by turning the cheek. So lastly, what do? We need to lift peace. We need to love peace, we need to live in peace, and we need to lift peace. And I'm going to give you just a few practical things, and I'll try to be as quickly as possible about this. Some practical ways to promote peace in your life. And I want you to look at the teachings of Jesus and His demonstration of it. Because the beautiful thing about Jesus is He just doesn't say it. He does it. There's no separation between really the words of Jesus and what He does. So I want to give you just a few things. First practical thing, see people in light of worship. What do I mean by that? See people through the lens of who you see God to be. But it's like when Jesus said, hey, when you come to the altar and you bring your gift, and then you remember you got some drama going on with somebody, you need to leave your gift and go get right with Him. First, see God, and then see your fellow man. And then understand where we all fit in. See people in the light of God's worship. Remember that dark night, I'm going to point to each of the applications in Jesus when He was betrayed and when He was crucified. They came to the Garden of Gethsemane with swords and with torches. And they said, are you Jesus of Nazareth? And He said, I am He. And the people fell at His feet. And Jesus challenged His followers not to take up the sword, but to be in peace with those captors. See people through the lens of worship and who God is. Number 2, agree with your adversary. Yes, that's what Jesus says in Matthew 5. Agree with your adversary while you're in the way. He says, not only agree with him quickly while you're in the way with him. In other words, compromise. There are times in our life where we all need to compromise. Where we aren't right, or being right doesn't really matter. Agree with your adversary. When Jesus was on trial, they said, are you the Son of God? And He said, you say rightly. He agreed with them. Agree with your adversary. Turn the other cheek. Now, I know preachers have tried to change what he says, but I'm not going to change it. I'm going to leave it to you to understand what turning the other cheek means. I think we all know what it means. That when someone slaps you, when someone hurts you, when someone wounds you, you don't respond in violence. You don't respond in trying to hurt them. It's not easy. But turn the other cheek. The only way that evil can be totally wiped out is by us doing good and not responding in evil. And lastly, pray for our enemies. That's another hard thing to do, isn't it? And why do you think God and Jesus ask us to pray for our enemies? Because the first person that has to step into the light is me and you. When you have to pray for your enemy, that means that all of your motives, all of your feelings first have to be shown. And if you can't pray for your enemy, then maybe you're contributing to the enemy. Pray for your enemy. It will cleanse you. It will help you see yourself for who you are. Pray for them. And of course, when Jesus was on that cross, He prayed for the very people crucifying Him. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It wasn't just something He taught. It was something He absolutely did. And then what's the result by us pursuing peace? You get the greatest compliment that could ever be given to you. They will be called the sons of God. They will be called the children of God. There's no better way to emulate Christ than to be called a son of God, to live in peace. And ultimately, that is the purpose of Christ, is to bring peace on this earth and in your life. That's why He came, to give you peace, to reconcile you to God Himself. Jesus said, peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. A peace that passes all understanding. That's what Christ desires for you. A peace of rest in your mind. And because of that, we become ministers in our lives of peace. We can live differently with our neighbor. We can live differently with our spouse. We can live differently among God's people. Because Christ has given us a peace in our own life. He has reconciled us to God the Father. Are you a child of God this morning? Being a Christian is the greatest life to live. It is a life of assurance, of hope, of peace. Without Christ, there's no hope. That at that time you're without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope. Prior to Christ, there's no hope. There's no hope in this world. Only through Christ can true peace be made within yourself and in that cosmic spiritual sense. Maybe you are a Christian this morning, but you need help praying for your enemies. I do. Need help praying for those who've hurt you. I do. Knowing what to do that's right. If you have any need, know that this church stands with you. Won't you come now as together we stand and as we sing.